Hello, YouTubers. Um, Hope everybody's doing well in this brave weekend. I created this video for the purpose of talking about undervolting and overclocking your i9-13900KS. This also goes towards the i9-13900K CPU. And basically, I wanted to share my findings and own strategies. I'm sure many of you guys will find that there are actually many different type of strategies, including from manually turning on XMP, turbo boost, and also other strategies like AI overclocking, manual overclocking, and of course the strategy with the Intel terminal velocity boost as well, which is the one thing I'm going to be using for this video. For this video, I'm going to be talking about my own specific strategy. I will be using the i9-13900KS as an example, as this is my own personal computer. For anybody who followed my last video on my first video about my custom made computer, it's running the i9-13900KS with the Asus ROG Z790 Apex motherboard with 6,000 megahertz on the Thermaltake RAM, which is currently overclocked to 6400 using XMP2. In this case, I will be spoken a little bit information about their own strategies, and also I'll be leaving in the link below some of the great tools and tools normally that I'm going to be using this, which I highly recommend. So let's definitely go ahead and get this started with, guys. So one of the first things I see you guys see on my screen, there's a couple of things here which I highly recommend to download and have ready. One of them is one of the most important tool here is the CPU hwmonitor. This is, guys, an essentially important tool, and most should have, especially if you're planning to overclock your CPU, or you're installing, like you're doing a custom loop, things like this, because it is important that you guys can definitely take a look at your own temperature and all of that. I have mine set up here this way, so I can normally check my CPU's temperature, as well as the power, how much is being drawn, and also how much is being clocked here. Um, and so you can always, adjust it. And of course, I have my graphics card information here as well. So another tool that it's definitely helpful, and one of the tools that we're going to be using for overclocking as well as undervolting, will be the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility. This tool actually, program has actually gone a lot of updates since the last couple of years. And for those of you guys that may have used in the past, there's a lot more things in here, like for example, that you can, update with your time memory, cache, performance per core tuning, which is something that you're able to do now. And of course, there's more information, another panel, which I believe last year, so there was only one, but you can now customize the full potential of using TVV, which is also known as the Intel Overclocking Terminal Velocity Boost, which is basically, when enabled, this process can, as it says here, reach the specific package radio when below the specific temperature. If above the specific temperatures, then the corresponding frequency ratio is reduced by the specific offset. So basically, it will normally run full speed as all the ones here. So when I start my overclocking process, I start by the BIOS, and normally I follow the strategies. Well, some of the strategies we're belonging to is Cinebench. For anybody who follow his videos, I will leave a little video below, which is great informatic information about overclocking. I highly recommend you guys to definitely check, as this is a great learning experience, uh, and into the path of overclocking. I decided to follow a few strategies, going from regular XMP, manual, AI overclocking, and as well as um, uh, turning the Intel terminal velocity boost as well, which is known again as TVB. So one of my previous strategies, which I'm going to share with you guys, was using basically the I use the AI overclocking because my previous manual overclocking actually didn't go as well. There was a lot of thermal throttling going on, and I did experience some crashes like blue screen deaths like watchdogs and things like that. I tested out using Cinebench and a few other ones. For some reason, they came out pretty okay, but then I found that using 3D Mark, for some reason, some of the tests was just either taking forever to load, or they were just like the screen just became black, like a black texture, and it was just not given a score. And it basically tells me that something was going on. After some time, I will start experiencing some crashes like blue screen of deaths, like the watchdog type of uh, you know thing. Then I was getting the clock watchdog, which that kind of tells you that it has to do with the CPU overclocking and all that. At first, I was concerned that it may have to do with the GPU because that, but I found some a couple of strategies, like for example, going to the BIOS and enabling the Generation 4 um, uh, option in the PCI section. I'm using the Asus motherboard, so it normally be like in an advanced option, I believe. And under the PCI configuration, I highly suggest that you guys do make sure that you guys enable because it's auto, especially if you guys are using a Razer cable or a Razer cable for your GPU. Since I'm using a custom, for those of you guys who follow my previous video, I'm using the Thermaltake Razer cable, which actually supports PCI 4. And so in this case, I had to enable that because for some reason I may be expecting that I was getting some lags. But now all that is actually gone thanks to that also trigger that. Um, so here is an example of basically of my previous temperatures, which I'm comparing this. This was actually run with the AI overclocking. I found that after going through a few overclocking procedures, I found that AI overclocking, they actually made the system stable, but they consume a little bit more wattage, watts in that case it's here, more volts and watts here. So for AI overclocking, it actually adjusted was able to manage getting to 6200 megahertz, at least on three of the uh, P cores, with some of them with 59 and 58 in here, while the rest will be about 4600 megahertz on the E cores. Of course, this caused also power to increase and temperature, as well as you can see voltages by about 1.564 in this case maximum. So this basically this was actually this test this example was done when I did actually a stress test here using OCCT, and of course benchmark and all that. So I normally then clear up the temperature, but I basically I use a different like benchmarks onto I use OCCT prime 95, and then of course I pretty much just have the highest one here in all the ones I used it. And so far, as you guys see, the highest degrees was 100 degrees Celsius. Um, I have to be honest with you guys. The one that gave me a little trouble was the P-Core 7, and 5 was definitely the second one. Um, so it took a lot of work to get this down. Now, for those of you guys using the i9 13900KS, the KS is a really hot chip. So for those of you guys follow Cinebench and all that and Intel, you guys know that you can actually increase this to 115 degrees Celsius and still be in stability. Believe in many cases, that's how normally even Cinebench is set up when overclocking his CPU for the i9K regular K. It should normally be about like 90 degrees or something like that in this case. It may hit 100 degrees, of course, when it comes to benchmarks and stress tests. It is completely normal that it may reach 100 degrees. In real-time gaming and all the type of lows, it normally should not get to that point. Just because when you're doing a stress test, it goes actually to a torture. It normally tortures your CPU to go beyond its limit there. This is also a way to test stability in this case. So I did this as an example for data purposes. I did reach out 100 degrees Celsius with OCCT, Prime 95, and then of course the rest was actually wasn't too bad. while powering. I was hitting about 306 watts. I actually do want to let know in this comment that I actually, in some tests, I did reach out to over 325 watts around there, which is definitely a lot of power there, guys. And of course, I did hit the main goal here. Now, as you guys see here on the far right corner, this is the new example here with the new boost. This is actually done using, I actually decided to turn off AI overclocking and decide to try the, the new method with turbo boost, turbo velocity boost here. So with this enable, using the manual undervolting, and this is also old undervolting, which wasn't something that was enabled. I didn't do actually in my previous strategies. Is this is the reason why it was this much power. But with now with the difference um, with undervolting, which is extremely important. After this, guys, I have to say, I agree with most people. What they say is that the new way to go is undervolting. Overclocking is something that you can definitely do, but definitely undervolt first, guys, because that is gonna save you a lot of headaches. It's gonna save you money on your electricity bill. It's definitely gonna save you guys a lot of headaches for sure. Um, and power consumption. So with the new here strategy is I was able to hit about 1.447 on the max here. For temperatures, you guys can do the difference. I was able to reduce this, and this is using benchmark like here OCCT, Cinebench, um, and of course I tried 3D Mark as well, and I was able to hit a max of 97 degrees, and this was on P-Core 7 as well. But for the rest, they were pretty much, as you guys see, about less under 90 degrees, except for like peak core about 91, your maximum core 94 degrees and stuff like that. But they were definitely, I was able to successfully achieve my goal, and that's getting this below 100 degrees Celsius. Even I could still get 115 degrees and still be stable, which I did experience stability. I didn't have much, but I did experience for thermal Intel Extreme Tuning. I did experience thermal throttling. If for anybody looking from this side here, you guys it definitely tells you if you're experiencing thermal throttling as well, or power limited throttling as well. This is some signs that tells you that something is definitely you should be able to, you know, manage this and set up your voltage and all that. Um, so with this is allowed me here. The E-cores temperatures is also pretty good. As you guys in ohm data, that's because it did actually overclock. I didn't decide to overclock the E-cores. I may do so in a bit, but at the moment I'm not seeing much of their performance difference in when it comes to E-cores. In this case, but yeah, it's normally about degrees, but in here it's as you guys can see, the E-cores, I would say probably just hit maximum 90 degrees Celsius here. Um, for uh, electricity, you guys can definitely see with undervolting, it made a huge improvement, guys. It went from like the max that was about 325 watts all the way down to 252.87. And this talking about OCCT and all that. Minimal with about 44.51 with the old data was 60.85. But with the old data, I did experience a lot of jump out to like spikes to about like probably minimum about 169 probably, and then but most of the time I end up seeing like about 200 210 watts and all them I was consuming even 267 even while watching videos or something like that. But with the new settings, it was definitely less. It was less than 100. I mean, many times it was 100, less 200. And again, this is only because of the benchmark and stress test. This doesn't mean that you're gonna get to this point while gaming. So that gives you kind of a clue that you're definitely saving a lot of difference. And believe me, guys, while gaming, I was definitely get about 260 watts around there, solid or slightly less sometimes, depending on the type of game and what I was doing. But definitely with this big number, it does tell you that you're definitely safe. As for overclocking, I decided to readjust things out. I'm still, making final adjustments. But for stability, for this video, and all that, I decided to at least get to the specific number. And so as you guys see, for the P cores, they were different, slightly different here, but for this one, I was actually able to get this all set up here to 6,000 megahertz for all P cores, while the E cores were pretty much, as you guys can see in the old data, was about 4,600, while here's about 43, so which is not much difference, guys, in regarding like benchmarks. I actually noticed that on Cinebench, uh, my multiple score was actually slightly a little bit more than how it was before. So it tells me that definitely it's the system is more stable, and of course heading all P cores from 6,000 normally. By default, I believe 2 3 of the cores, I believe 2 were about 6,000 with the KS, I believe, when you're doing like turbo boost and all that. But with the current overclocking, I was able to get pretty much all them to 6,000. Of course, with thermal velocity boost, if temperature goes to a higher level, it will normally decrease down to 100 megahertz or so, depending like the type of setup here. So um, as you guys see, it's definitely a huge improvement. Um, and all the undervolting is definitely the way to go, guys. Some may be like, oh well, you got the KS, you're, why undervolting? Even with the KS, even with the K, you're still spending a specific amount of watts, which it's set up automatically in the BIOS. And guys, I have to tell you this. Undervolting doesn't mean that you're losing a low performance, FPS, or anything like that. Even in real time gaming, you will not gonna notice much difference. I mean, I personally didn't. So undervolting definitely says you guys not just you know, a lot of good amount of money for electricity. I'm sure you guys can see the difference between 325 or at least 306 for the data you guys see to 252. That's a good significant amount of watts. And we're talking about this example is the KS, which is a big hungry power CPU. Now, for anybody who's wondering and all that, just want to make sure it's clear up also. The KS and the K are very similar, actually about the same chip. The only big difference is that the KS is considered to be a binded CPU, meaning that it's pretty much about the same as the K. It's just that Intel sets aside those Ks, and then they normally do tests and they put aside, they're like, okay, the CPUs are the ones that they want on a higher frequency with a lower amount of watts and voltage. Um, with the regular K, you probably may have to increase it and be at least to be able to get to about 6,000 megahertz. You probably may need to, you know, change and increase the amount of voltage on this. It may be hard unless you actually one of those with the silicon library and you have a really good i9K, then you probably be able to get to the same, about almost the same level. But in case like that, normally the KS outperforms a little bit slightly, not a huge difference, but um, in my case, I was able to do both undervolting and at least keep it to almost as the default settings. The only difference is that instead of 2 or 3, I was able to at least get to 6,000 all cores. And I believe I can still slightly increase it, at least getting to 61, 62, maybe about megahertz, which is something that I'm gonna probably do slowly. But I did spend a big considerable amount of time with overclocking, doing a lot of stress testing, making sure I got the stability, and that's how I was able to go for that. Now the strategy I did to get to this point was using this tool they call Intel Extreme Tuning Utility. For those of you guys who owns an Intel processor, this definitely can be a great tool, and this is actually one of the tools that helped me out. With this, you can actually highly recommend, and one reason why is because you can actually do real time uh, benchmarks and all that while making updates to your configuration. And then at the end, if you like the way it is, you guys have two options. The one is set it up in the BIOS manually, and second is you guys can go to the settings, go to advanced options, and there's an option here that says restore training after reboot. Basically how this works is um, basically when you set up and you save your configuration and you have this check mark, you have the option where if you need to restart your computer, or powering off or all that, after it goes back to Windows and all that, it will normally restore um based on what you have actually saved on your profile. So it will enable that and it will just go back to how it was before to your current configurations. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you probably have to go back and open it up and load. That's why many people, not many of us, will just go to the BIOS, put this update, and not worry about that, you know. So for those of you guys wondering the BIOS, you know, I'll provide a little bit more information on some ports, especially for those who use an Asus motherboard, because there could be a little bit slightly difference on the type of motherboard. If you're like Gigabyte or that, I do recommend like using Google, finding out because the names can be a little different. So you can use this as a reference, as an example how my strategy works. So yeah, it's up to you guys if you want to set up as in a BIOS or you want to enable this. Unfortunately, because I'm using Asus, there's been some issues reported on Reddit about Asus motherboards not able to edit this because you need to enable the watchdog from which I, you know, have gotten those blue screens. I don't see anything that, you know, basically any, you know, specific thing. Everything is updated, even BIOS about regarding watchdog and all that. So it's just something that it looks like many others are reported having with Asus motherboards as well. So now when it comes to first strategy, you have a couple of them. You can either overclock and do undervolting, or in my case, start off undervolting and then overclock. So to undervolt, you're gonna go to you have two options. You can use the compact view and go to the core voltage offset, or go to advanced view, which is my favorite option, and just go to the top right corner where it says core voltage offset. This is basically where you're gonna be over. So you have the option to go here or increase it. In my case, I was able to get to my desired amount, which is a negative 0.080 volts here. The core voltage offset, it allows you to definitely apply that the course the main crest voltage of times, and allows you to undervolt this. Um, so it is highly recommended, you guys, when you guys are doing it, you guys can start by 10 number increment, like increase it by each 10, but then start going by 5, just because you want at least go into a specific stability there, find the number works for you, start decreasing, increasing, and then make sure that you guys are doing benchmarks. The one tool that's definitely you should have next to you a lot of times that's going to be helpful is Cinebench R23. 3D Mark is something I use at the end after using Cinebench. But Cinebench, I'm sure for those of you guys follow many of the videos like channels like Gary Tag or J2 Sense, one of my favorite channels. You know that many of the tech gurus they use Cinebench with a conjunction with inter-extreme utility, which is that's what I do as well, and it's been extremely helpful. So after you guys go into the process of undervolting your CPU, make sure that you do uh, benchmark. If you guys do get an error message or crashes or close that, then go back to your last configuration until you guys are able to find stability. After that point on, if you guys should be able to normally go to the process and increase in your, you know, ratio. Yeah, in this case, you wanna overclock it to, like, you know, from 6,000 to 61 and things like that. Um, so for this case, you a couple of settings I have max is I set this to unlimited, turbo boost max, turbo boost time window set it max, ICC max, turn all those I set up automatically. The one difference is that by default, you're gonna see probably things like the inter overclocking terminal velocity boost disabled. In my configuration, you guys have the option to use this enable. Of course, you guys don't have to, but this actually worked, and I actually found out that my temperatures were able to at least keep it under 100 degrees Celsius thanks to actually the thermal velocity boost. For more information, there is information about in the Intel website about the different sets here. For example, Intel Turbo Boost Max Technology 3.0, boosted frequencies of 1 or 2 favorite cores available if the CPU is running below its power, current, and temperature limits. And here is inter-thermal velocity boost, opportunistically increase clock frequency by up to 100 megahertz, available if the CPU is within temperature limits 70 degrees Celsius for desktop, 65 degrees Celsius for mobile, and turbo power mode is available. For single core, TVB takes the faster of the two favorite CPU cores to a speed superior to Turbo Boost Max 3.0. All cores TVB, which is in my case ultra fast speeds when all cores are active and the CPU is under its temperature threshold. Because mine is actually in temperature threshold here, you guys will notice that right now it's way below the maximal average. So my as you guys can see, the temperature is actually being pretty amazing. And actually, it's a refresher for me because, guys, I have to say that normally, previously, the maximum amount of temperature degrees that I was able to get, even when not under load, probably maybe I would consider maybe like YouTube, some web-based videos to be considered to be some type of low because it does use an amount of resources on CPU. So I was the max I hit was about 75 degrees Celsius on my old configuration, and minimum I was about staying about 45, 49 degrees, even sometimes to 50 in the 50 degrees Celsius. But with the new configuration, I was feeling refresher because I was able to finally see my CPU going below 40 degrees. In many cases, you guys can see the minimum I'm able to get at least about probably in this about probably about 24, 25 degrees Celsius. And the maximum that so far like right now I'm seeing about 41 degrees. So actually in the 30, 40 degrees as normally it is expected, or in many times with the KS you expect high temperature many times, and even the 80 degrees will be like 65 degrees or higher is probably be normal for this power hungry CPU. But thanks to undervolting, I was able to set up my temperature and finally able to um, get this below the 50 degrees. Even under not load, I was able to at least get this in a stable condition here. And again, with lower voltage as well, and able to overclock it with all cores in normal here. So here's an example as it talks about terminal velocity, because it's not going to the trigger this. As you guys can see, my temperature is set up from 68 degrees Celsius to 75 degrees Celsius here, with the offset to -1. And I did set up a second one, which is 100 degrees Celsius for core 1 and 2. The rest is 90 degrees to 85 degrees Celsius. And of course, I disable for this offset 2, P core 1 and 2, while setting the rest for negative offset 1 here. So in this case, as you guys can see, because it then reached the temperature threshold, it normally is able to get all the way to 6,000 megahertz, even though the A core here says 56, 59, because the top upper cores is set up to 6,000 megahertz in this case, or at least closest one here. So if it does reach a specific temperature, it will definitely go down to around 56 degrees, 5600, excuse me, megahertz, 59 or so, depending on temperature threshold. This actually can be very useful, especially to help manage your temperature as well as the amount of voltage used. This is extremely can be very helpful, especially to keep stability. I decided that after I switched the overclocking terminal velocity boost on, I found that I wasn't experiencing any more thermal throttling and no power limited throttling as well. This allowed me to understand that I did reach out to a good amount on the offset, which is again negative 0.080 volts, with stability and overclocking as well. Based on my temperatures, it looks like I can choose slightly increase the peak core, which is something I'm going to try to do, and see maybe later on in this case. But I'm actually pretty content with 6,000 megahertz, which is normally the full by the KS. But again, I was able to highly get both into 6,000 megahertz for the peak cores only. So it's actually pretty satisfying, and also at the same time keeping the power in at least within good amount and not with 300 watts, which a lot of people complains on the KS for going over 300 watts, when you can actually on the boat and at least go close to at least what the i9K was around previously, and able to overclock it. Remember, the KS is like the K is just binded, which you can use less amount voltage to be able to overclock it. In this case, that's the good example that you can undervolt and at the same time overclock it to a point that you'll be able to get into stability. But 1% about CPU utilization here, and all that. So it's normally by um, Task Manager shows about sometimes about 10% or so, but it's actually being pretty good. Better stability. Some of the things here you guys can see for Cinebench, even my score, I found that score was slightly better. OCCT, I actually decided to run it for 15 minutes and 10:30, but for this case, I found this to be stable with AVX2 um, and uh, in large amount of data as well. So this is set up to be large instead of small to make sure that it's a little bit more stressful in here and it's still able to pass with no errors. I did found previously um, that I was getting some errors on OCCT from Pro 95. I wasn't getting any. Um, and then I found out that for some reason the settings for the terminal velocity boost was readjusted for some reason, and so this was about almost about 70 degrees, 75 degrees, which or 68, which it was matching the same as the first temperature, which I think that was causing a lot of the errors I had at the end when I was at pretty much at the end part of the CPU. And then I started my previous one and I was getting like a one error, but everything has passed. And then after adjusting this, for, like to 100 degrees for the second temperature and all that, I found that I wasn't getting any more errors, which that actually passed it with no single errors even prior to that there in this case. So yeah, it's definitely a huge improvement, guys. Undervolting your CPU is definitely the way to go first, guys. This is the path to stability, and then after offsetting over undervolting your CPU, go ahead and overclock it. At least make sure you're getting this. My main goal was to get this to under 100 degrees Celsius because for again the KS for the KS normally you want to stay about 90 degrees Celsius or less, or for the KS is normally you want to stay below 150 degrees Celsius. In my case, I decided to limit it mines to 100 degrees. Even with Intel Extreme Tune Utility, the max you can only set it up this is to 100 degrees Celsius, which is completely fine because I didn't want to go to 150 degrees Celsius, which I think did in the previous setup. It was too stable. I didn't experience any crashes, but it was still consuming a low amount of watts. If for like in this case, is definitely a huge improvement. That's a big jump from 325 watts to this. And of course, even though we're talking about benchmarking and stressing, because again, in real time, like gaming and some of the loads, you won't get as the same as you get with doing a benchmark, a high-ending benchmark, and a stress test, which it puts your CPU on a torture. That's more that you won't get that in a game. And I know that I was expecting less, but even so, doing benchmarks and stress tests allowed me to know exactly what my limit was, what the max is, and allows me to readjust things, to change my strategy. And so that's what I did. And so, this actually made me extremely happier because, again, seeing my CPU block seeing sometimes over under, going under 40 degrees was definitely a huge improvement. So it just feels refreshing, and seeing a month that you're spending less amount of watts, and because this is benchmark stress says, I'll be using that for less. So um, for those of you guys you looking to overclock this in numbers into the BIOS, for those of you guys using the Asus motherboard, there's an option in the basically it should be in the let me see here. Should be basically in the extreme section of the overclocking section there. there's an option at the very bottom. It's called Core SVID Voltage. That is the name that is set up in there instead of Core Voltage Offset. So if you guys don't see this, you guys have to Google it. But for right now, for Asus one, it's Core SVID Voltage, which I'll put it in the notes in the link or information below of the video in this case. So, and of course you can enable interboost and adjust your core voltage offset, which you'll be able to undervolt your CPU there. And of course, again, if you guys want to definitely try the thermal velocity boost, I can definitely tell you and highly recommend, because thanks to this, I was able to keep my temperature in a good level without having to worry about experiencing any thermal throttling with this disabled. Because when I had this disabled, I did experience some thermal throttling even with undervolting, and I was experiencing some with because my P Core 7 it's definitely pretty hungry, and it does get really hot pretty fast. So it does get to 100 degrees. Both my Core 7 and P Core 5, they were like the two hottest part of the cores I have, and they were just a huge pain. So with thermal velocity boost, it allowed it to bind it to the other ones, keep a good temperature as long as you set it up here. And yeah, as you guys can see, um, on the CPU HW monitor on the far right, it's definitely able to hit 6,000 degree at 6,000 megahertz, 6,000 megahertz, thanks to the to the current temperature setup, because it is currently under 75 degrees, so able to take advantage of the full boost, of course. And knowing that we able to get this uh, uh, with Cinebench and all that to about 91 degrees. I was still seeing that maybe by gaming another one, this probably may end up getting to probably close to 85 degrees or less. Um, maybe probably less, because the way that it's just reach about not over 96 degrees, it may reach out close to about 85 depending on the game. But in many other apps may just be probably you know less than 75 degrees or less than 80, and still be able to hit that 6,000 megahertz in that case. So yeah, terminal velocity is definitely the way to go, guys. Undervolting is highly recommendable. I hope that this video helped you guys, and also don't forget that you guys can definitely do one important thing is make sure that after you guys hit your apply, make sure that you guys are saving this. Set up your own profile. Don't save on the default. Default is actually the default settings set by Intel. So something happens, you can go back to the default settings. So I set up here my profile called 6,000 megahertz. You can create multiple profiles, save it and save it. This way, in case something happens, and you don't have the option to enable the the restore training afternoon, and you don't want to do it from the BIOS, then at least you can just go back into a profile section, uh, click it, and then show value, and then apply. That will normally apply there, and you can even check by going to advanced tuning and check the configuration and everything here. Um, you have the option to do stress tests from here as well, and benchmarks. But many of us just likes to do it from Cinebench and all that, because it considers to be a little bit more resourceful, and that's put a little bit more strain into the CPU, which is something that we want at least to know in how stable we have this. So yeah, it's definitely um, highly recommend, guys. If you guys definitely find this helpful, and you guys like my video and any tips I have given, um, definitely give a like to this. I will leave a couple links with how with to download Cinebench R23. Same goes with OCCT. OCCT can do many other things besides, as you guys can see, you guys can do stability tests, which is stress tests, and not just for CPU, but even for graphics card and memory, which is something I've done, and a benchmark as well. This is pretty good too, guys. So from that point on, there's also 3D Mark, which is something that I actually done it, because 3D Mark can be helpful. I found actually on a previous um, overclocking setup that I was able to pass Cinebench, but as I stated previously, I did have issues with 3D Mark, and then I found that there was some issues with thermal throttling and then the overclocking settings. So after you're done with Cinebench, definitely try 3D Mark, try the different tests. Um, you know, there you can get them for free and you can run all of the tests from there. There's about 3 tests there. um I believe there's the night, fire, sky, and times 5 are like the most popular ones. So definitely run the night one first, because that goes with more CPU and interior CPU graphical work. And then the times 5 can also do both graphics and that. Just like mine, I have my graphics this. I was able to max it out to 3000 megahertz, but I slightly lower, so it does get to very close to it, which I'm very satisfied with the results. And temperatures being also really low, even less, about 40 degrees. Even with my last setup, it was still doing an amazing job with how it is, water cool and all that. So yeah, it's some great tool, guys. Definitely get this. There's also a good number of other overclocking tools you can use. Um, but yeah, Cinebench is definitely a good one to have, especially working with extreme tune utility, as well as having OCCT for stress tests, because you definitely want to try to do a stress test as well besides that, to tell you exactly if you have any errors or not. Just like I got mine, this allowed me to know that even though I passed Cinebench with flying colors, I did get some errors on the stress test previously, but I found out because it was due to the misconfiguration setup on temperature 2, which after running it again, the stresses, as you guys saw previously, there was no errors detected on that. So yeah, anyways, I hope that you guys like this video. If you guys have any questions, leave in the comment section. Any comments, feedback you guys are leaving it. If you guys like my video, please do give a like and subscribe below. I will try my best to put any more videos. If you guys have any specific video you guys have in mind, any specific content, please leave it in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to work and try to set up this. And yeah, I hope you guys all have a great day.